First thing is you got to have an early morning start. Like you want to be on your way up the peak as it's getting light. The second
Okay.
thing is you got to be prepared for inclement weather. You definitely have to take rain gear. You got to take some extra warm gear. You want to take plenty of water. You want to take plenty of snacks and things. And you want to try to be on the top of the peak by midday at the latest.
All right. Thank you so much for being with me today, Bill. I really appreciate your time. I know you're very busy running a business, but also getting out on the water and fighting the fight for conservation, which I want to learn more about and dig deep into what it takes to protect a river and what the different factors are that go into it. But Bill Dvorak from Salida and DVK Rafting, welcome on the show. And I'd love to learn where your journey started with rafting and how long you've been running rafting trips and what were you doing maybe before that?
Well, I think it actually started. I grew up on a ranch in northern Wyoming, and I had a cousin who used to take me canoeing on the North Platte River. And then the ranch was actually a boundary with the Tongue River. So I've kind of been around rivers basically all my life. And then when I went to New Zealand, I worked at the Outward Bound School, and they sort of introduced me to kayaking. And
Okay.
so I started whitewater kayaking in New Zealand in the sort of early 70s, but I also had an outdoor education center in Australia where I started a canoe program. So again, I've been around water a long time, but how I got into rafting was when I came back in 1979, I was 5.5 years in Australia and a year and a half in New Zealand and a year coming home through Asia, about 4.5 months of that climbing in Nepal. I went to the University of Colorado for my master's degree in alternative and experiential education. And I was looking around for an internship, and they offered me a job to coordinate the Partners River program, which was a program that worked with kids who'd been arrested, and they matched them up with adult volunteers. And one of the things they provided as a mechanism to facilitate a relationship between the kid and the adult was a multi-day river trip. And it was also an incentive for people to volunteer because they got basically a free multi-day river trip. So I did that for 5 years, and we were actually the most successful recidivistic program in the country for those 5 years.
Oh, and, wow. What an incredible way to help those kids.
So anyway, after Ronnie Reagan got elected, he decided it was better to incarcerate people than to divert them. We were keeping kids out of jail for $7,000, $8,000 a year, and it was 30 to 50 to keep them in jail. And funds got tight. Long story short, they asked me to buy the company out because they were in financial straits. And so I did and moved down here to the Arkansas and been here for almost 40 years now.
Wow. One of the earliest river rafting companies in Colorado? Or
you know, I actually have the first river license in the state of Colorado. I've got the #1 license, but I think there might have been some other companies around before me, but they kind of faded away. There's not around anymore.
Wow, that is, I want to see that plaque. That's got to be for a state that has so many rafting companies and so many great rivers. You probably have a lot of adventures under your belt over the years.
You got a few.
Yeah. So Salida, the Arkansas River runs right through it. A lot of people don't know exactly, it's not as popular, I would say, maybe as Breckenridge or Vail and some of the ski resort towns, but we absolutely love Salida. For those that don't know Salida, Buena Vista, and some of these smaller towns, they're only a couple of hours away from Denver. What are some different adventures that one could do in the area if they had, let's say, 3 or 5 days? And I know you guys even offer multi-day adventures, different activities.
We offer a multi-sport package. We always try to package it with an overnight trip on the river, but there's great mountain biking here. We have 14ers out the backyard here. I'm actually looking at one right now at my office window. So I think of the 54 14ers in the state of Colorado, 28 of them occur along the Arkansas drainage. And I think 18 of those occur here in Chaffee County. So we have great hiking. We've got good rock climbing, got gold medal fishing. Some people have probably heard about the spill that happened in Durango a few years ago. Well, we had a much worse spill back in the late 80s here on this river when the Yak Tunnel and California Gulch up out of Leadville spilled. and
Okay.
basically wiped out all the fish and all the invertebrates on the river. And I was lucky enough to have taken our current senator, Tim Wirth, on several river trips. And though I went back to Washington, D.C. and talked with him, and he got me lunch with the guy who did the funding for the EPA sites, the senator who was in charge of that. And we got an EPA Superfund site designation. And then by
Wow.
1992, we had cleaned up the river. And in 2002, we actually got the river designated 102 miles of gold medal water, and that doubled the amount of gold medal water in the state of Colorado. So we have a tremendous fishery here. And then there's all sorts of other things: horseback riding, zip lines, kayaking, inflatable kayaking. There's a variety of things that we can do here on our multi-day trips.
That's incredible. I know I think, spent a week there, and within that week, we were able to climb a 14er. It was one of our friend's birthday. He came out to visit. We climbed a 14er, rafted down the river in one of your inflatable kayaks, and went mountain biking, or went to the hot springs within 48 hours. And to be able to squeeze in, I think if you had to pick more adventures per square mile, it's a tough place to beat.
Well, when we first moved here, this place was it was dying. They'd closed the Climax molybdenum mine, and they were kind of desperate for someone to be the president of the chamber. So I'd been here about 3 years, but I was kind of a relative newcomer, but they gave me the job. And I sort of recognized this as going to be a recreational mecca and started promoting it, and got us listed in Outside Magazine as not one of the 10 best recreational destinations, but honorable mention. And it sort of spiraled since then. And then the other thing that happened was the state of Colorado passed a legislating bill that said that counties could go ahead and pass a lodging tax, where you could tax people who were staying in your motels and hotels, and then use that money for marketing. And so that bill, or that vote, had previously not passed in Chaffee County, but 2 times. And I reinvigorated that, and we actually won by 14 votes and got a Chaffee County Visitors Bureau. And our first year, our budget was $80,000. And I actually resigned as the chairman of that committee in 2016 to run for county commissioner, and our budget was $550,000.
Wow. Oh, that's amazing. And you can, it goes right back to those hotels and those restaurants, and everybody benefits. It's a great way to get people there and be able to have the voice where you can do it responsibly and share the message coming directly from the Visitors Bureau or different voices. You mentioned that during the spill, I was curious, by the time you guys cleaned up the river, did those species and fish come back?
Actually, they've come back really strong. Like I say, to be gold medal designated water, you've got to have so many fish per mile and so many pounds of fish per mile. And there's a whole thing, and we've exceeded that designation by about 4-fold. So It's a tremendous fishery.
That's amazing. On that topic of conservation and all of your hard work of working with the senators, going to Washington, fighting that fight, tell me, I'm so curious to learn more about the work that you did to turn the Browns Canyon area into, you were mentioning, a national monument. And
it's kind of a long story.
We got time.
So anyway, we started working on that project 20 some years ago, and we were always trying to get it designated as wilderness. Okay. And we started out with about 108,000 acres that we were going to designate as wilderness. And we came very close when Joel Heffley was our local congressman. We had every federal legislator in the state of Colorado back the bill. And all it had to do, it passed the Senate. It just needed to come to a vote in the House. And Joel Heffley was the head of the ethics committee. And there was a Texas legislator named John DeLay who did some things that weren't ethical. And the Republican Party just wanted the ethics committee to slap his hand and say, be a good boy from here on out, don't do anything. But Joel Heffley said, no, he did something unethical. We have to censor him. And so in retaliation for him censoring that, they didn't let his bill come to a vote. And the next person that came in at that legislative position was angry with Joel because he didn't support him. And it was a long story, and we had a three-way race. He won by about 2 points. And so it was kind of dormant for a while. And then when I worked at Outward Bound, Mark Udall was my boss. And so he was our senator. And I was actually working for the National Wildlife Federation. And I went to talk to him about some issues that we had. And he sort of asked me to stay after the meeting and asked me if I would take his son and train him to be a river guide. And I said, sure. And I said, there's another thing. Is there any way I could get you to reintroduce a Browns Canyon wilderness bill? And he said, well, let me think about it. And he called me back about a week later and said, you know what we're going to do? We'd never get a wilderness bill through this Congress. But if we can work the right way with Obama, we can probably get a national monument through. And so we jumped through a lot of hoops for about a year and a half, had big public meetings, had all sorts of show me trips, all that stuff. I probably made 6 trips back to DC, meeting with people. And long story short, it was the first wilderness-oriented national monument that Obama designated. He did the Pullman district in Chicago, and he did the an area that had been a Japanese internment camp in Hawaii, and he did Browns Canyon. And we kind of used that as the model to go ahead and then show people what he needed to see to do a national monument. And in the end, he designated more country as national monument than any president in history. So it was kind of good to set that precedent.
Just the appreciation of the amount of work it takes to get some of these things through. It's a long-term, just fight the fight to keep going.
Yeah.
And thank you for doing that. And we hope that all of us keep fighting that fight for more places that we love.
Yeah.
But
just to finish that story, one of the things that was cool about it was I was then invited back to the Oval Office for the official signing. And so nice. I have pictures in my office and stuff here with shaking the president's hand. And we had both our senators, we had our congressmen, we had the head of the Forest Service, we had the head of the BLM, we had the head of GQ, their environmental group. And so it was a pretty robust group. Sally Jewell was there, the Secretary of the Interior.
That's really amazing. And help us understand what comes with these protections. What's the threat otherwise?
Well, for a long time, Pierre, the resistance to designating it as a wilderness bill was people would say, well, we like it the way it is. We don't want to change it. We don't think that, we can have access to it. We can fish, we can hunt, we can do all those kinds of things. And so you just never know. And we just kept saying, well, without permanent protection, we don't know what will happen. And suddenly, the big part of Browns Canyon was actually designated as a wilderness study area. And part of that wilderness study area protection was there was a mineral withdrawal, and that mineral withdrawal expired. And usually the BLM has some time to go ahead and reinstitute that. But there was a mining group down in Nevada that filed an appeal, and they won and said, no, it's open. And so all of a sudden we had 4 mining claims on the Arkansas River in Browns Canyon. And I think that was one of the things that helped convince a lot of people that, yes, there are potential threats out there, and nobody wants to have gold mining and dredging and all that sort of stuff on a gold medal river, plus the most popular whitewater stretch in the country. And so that, I think, brought a few more people around to our side and lowered the resistance.
Yeah, and I think that's what a lot of us could get engaged in the boundary waters and different places. The threat to these areas and surrounding areas is usually mining, and its long-term impact of the water quality and the species, and not just your recreation sport. So thank you for doing that, fighting that fight, and then we're doing everything you're doing to protect these places, not just as a business, but you're doing this above and beyond your rafting business. And it's for all of us, you're planting the seeds with the trees we get to enjoy shade for many
Well,
years.
the other thing, for about 10 years, I worked with the National Wildlife Federation, and we did a lot of work on oil and gas and trying to get oil and gas developed much more sustainably and with conservation in mind. And we had some pretty good successes during the Obama administration, and sort of that kind of went by the wayside afterwards. But you know, at least we set some precedents of some certain things, and some certain oil and gas companies sort of continued to comply with sort of the rules and regulations. And then some of the stuff that we instituted was actually passed here in the state of Colorado. And for a number of years, Colorado had the most restrictive oil and gas rules in the country. And so again, that protects a lot of the headwaters and primarily big game and wildlife habitat and migration routes and calving and lambing areas and all those kinds of things.
Yeah, that's just even being on the table, being at the table with conservation in mind, it can make a lot of difference where, you know, you don't have to stop maybe the drilling, but how can we do it in, like you said, in a more sustainable way, and considering all the other impacts? Maybe we could come up with ways to do it with the least amount of environmental impact. Rafting trips. So you've got 50 years of rafting experience, just doing some math backwards and running, being on the water, and you're saying one of the best rivers to run around the country, maybe the world, is the Arkansas River and the Browns Canyon stretch. What makes it so unique for you? What do you love about it, and what do people love about it? What gives it that title?
Well, again, I think the biggest thing about a river is it's kind of like a living entity. Every day that you go on it, it's different. The water level can be different. The weather can be different. The group of people that you can be different. There's just all sorts of things that change on a daily basis. So I guess the big thing is it doesn't get boring. You know, it's just always challenging. It's always exciting. And it's always different. So it's just kind of a living, breathing entity in its own regards. And you learn to sort of, I guess, become one with the river in a lot of ways. And that's what kept me attracted to it, or got me attracted to it. Like I said, I grew up on a small ranch in Wyoming, and there was a river as one of our boundaries of our property. And so I've been around rivers since I was, you know, like 2 years old, I guess, is when I first remember seeing the river. And, you know, again, different things, started out canoeing, kayaking, and eventually worked my way into rafting, probably in the late 70s, I guess, is when I started rafting.
Okay. And then Browns Canyon specifically, how long is the stretch? Is it half-day trip, full day, overnights? What are the options if someone's interested in running the Browns Canyon?
Yes, you can do all those things.
All of those trips.
Most popular thing is a half-day trip, which is about 10, 11 miles. Okay. And but there's a full day trip that goes about 17, 18 miles. And then there's an overnight trip where we start well above Browns Canyon, clear up above Buena Vista, and then float into Browns Canyon Wilderness Area for our overnight camp, and then float out of it the next day.
Okay.
And we also do.
Salida?
Can finish in Salida. It just depends on the water level. Okay. If the water's high, it's easier to get all the way to Salida. As the water starts to drop, there's a takeout called Big Bend, and when the water gets pretty low, we start using a takeout called Stone Bridge, and it just depends on. We spend about the same amount of time on the water, but it just takes longer when the water drops to go that distance. And we do have also multi-day trips. We can do as many as 3 and 4 days on the Arkansas and just continue downstream. So okay, it's not as popular as, say, the half-day, 1 day overnight trips, but we get certain groups that want to do that.
Okay, and then the water level is all fed by snow melts, right? There's no dams or upriver.
There is no dams per se on the Arkansas River, but what happens is in the summer and kind of carry over from the winter, there is water that is brought through tunnels from the Aspen area. It's called the Frying Pan Arkansas Project, and they've actually drilled a tunnel through the mountains, and they bring water over from there, and they store it in upstream reservoirs, in Clear Creek and Turquoise reservoirs. And then they can release that during the season. And we have what's called a voluntary flow program, where we work with the Southeast Water Conservancy District and the towns of Aurora and Pueblo and Colorado Springs to try to, because they all get a pretty good economic bump from the river in the economic substance it brings, you know, with motels and restaurants and travelers
Mm-hmm.
coming through, they all realize the economic value of the river. So they're
Okay.
kind of willing to work with us to keep water in the river. And so the voluntary flow program is designed to keep us at a minimum of 700 CFS through the middle of August. And
Okay.
we're about the only river in the state that has that sort of a guarantee. So it gives us a longer season. And, then there's some things that happen, like they can exchange water. So they've been exchanging water all spring, and the water has been sort of, 1,000, 1,200, and they just quit doing that. So now the river has come up, it's coming up 500 CFS today, just because they've quit doing that exchange, and they start bringing it up as at 50 CFS an hour. So it goes over a 5-hour period. And again, that's for the aquatic life to sort of acclimatize itself to what's going on with the resource, and, not just get flushed away sort of thing.
Sure. Wow. I'm learning so much. There's so little that I know. And I feel that way every single time I jump on a podcast with one of our outfitters. So you guys run not just the Arkansas River, you have the Colorado River trips, Dolores, Green River, Gunnison, North Platte, San Miguel. So what are they seasonal? What is the best time to go rafting in Colorado? And what are some of your other trips, rivers that you enjoy? And if there's a thing or two about some of those rivers that you'd like to share with us, that would be nice.
Well, our two main rivers are obviously the Arkansas, because we're based here. And the next river would be the Gunnison Gorge, which is, again, it's called a National Conservation Area that was added to a national monument to upgrade it to a national park. And we run mostly fishing trips on that. And again, it's sort of dam control. It's below Blue Mesa and all those reservoirs upstream, Curaconte, Morro Point. And so it's got a reliable flow all year long. And it is also a gold medal fishery, but it's only 14 miles long. And so we do fishing trips there, and they're kind of unique in that there's a road that goes into the wilderness area, but then stops. And so you have to hike or horsepack all your gear in that last mile to the river. So we have to go the day before and horsepack everything down and put all the boats together and the frames and put everything together. And then the next day we pick up our clients and bring them around, and they have to hike their personal gear in that last mile. And most of our fishing trips are actually 3 days long. 3 days is a long time to spend on 14 miles.
14
but the fishing
miles.
is so good that, everybody's happy to do that.
Yeah.
And so that's probably our other main resource. And again, it's probably the most tightly regulated river in the country, in that there are only 2 commercial launches a day, and you can only have a total of 12 people per launch. So if we have 8 fishermen, we have a guide per every 2 fishermen. So we've 4 guides and 8 clients. And so that's, right now I'm in the middle of what's called stonefly season, where there's this very large bug, a size 4 if you're a fisherman, called a pteronarcis, that hatches at this time of year, and then it's followed by a golden stone, followed by a yellow Sally. So there's a whole series of stoneflies that hatch in the month of June, and people will come from all over the country and all over the world to fish that hatch. And so I have back to back trips, 5 trips in a row, late May into the end of June. And then we have a few more. And then the next best time to fish it is September. But we also do some recreational trips in there as well. And most of them are 2 days, where we just go in and camp overnight one night and do some hiking and sort of look around. And then next day you're out of the river again. And the Colorado is kind of just like a normal river. It's peaking right now at this time of year, but it also has some upstream dams. So it has a consistent flow. And usually somewhere around 700-800 CFS is toward the end of the season. Right now, I believe it's probably running about 2,500 to 3,000.
Oh, wow.
Because
it's moving.
Because the snow is melting.
All that late season snow that you guys got too in March, and even going into April, that probably helped a lot.
So again, mid-June is usually when rivers peak in Colorado, and depending on how far north and south you are, earlier in certain areas, later in certain areas. It's not only where you are in longitude and latitude, but it's kind of what your elevation is. It depends on when the river peaks, but it's usually sort of mid-June.
shifting gears into climbing 14ers, since you guys offer that as a guided trip, uh, are you guys seeing the influx of uh, outdoor recreation growing in your area? More people coming out to climb 14ers as outdoor recreation is kind of blowing up around the country?
Yeah, we see a lot more people doing all sorts of recreational activities. I mean, the classic example for me is we also run shuttles for people that are doing river trips. And last year, we were having trouble finding parking spots for shuttle vehicles. And we found out sort of at the end of the season, we thought it was just an influx of private boaters primarily. But what we found out was that nobody would carpool. Everybody had to come in their own vehicle. So they didn't because of COVID. So, but again, we just saw a tremendous increase in not only river traffic, but also the number of people that were hiking and climbing and doing all the activities, a lot of mountain biking. We have 2 new e-bike mountain or bike companies that have just kind of come into existence last year just because of the popularity of e-bikes now.
Yeah.
So it's definitely booming.
With climbing 14ers, what are some best practices that we could share with people about if they're thinking, if they're a beginner, or they're easier mountains to get to from you, or if it's somebody's first time climbing a 14er, what are some things to know and consider before hiking it?
First thing is you got to have an early morning start. Like you want to be on your way up the peak as it's getting light. The second thing is you got to be prepared for inclement weather. You definitely have to take rain gear. You got to take some extra warm gear. You want to take plenty of water. You want to take plenty of snacks and things. And you want to try to be on the top of the peak by midday at the latest. Maybe have a quick lunch and then get the hell out of there before the afternoon thunder showers come in. And pretty much every afternoon, we get afternoon thunder showers here. We get afternoon cloud buildup. And if you're up there and you're on those ridges and the lightning strikes, you know, you need to get feet off the ridge as quick as you can and get down lower so you're not the highest thing. And what we always recommend people to do is to sit on their pack or something else that's not as conductive of electricity as, say, the earth is. And just wait for that to pass. And there's a way to figure out how the lightning is coming your way. And, you know, you count seconds between the thunder booms and it's moving your way, then that's the time to sort of make a retreat. And then as it goes past you, you'll know. And so you can start hiking again. But the big thing that I see so many people do is they're not prepared. You know, their shorts and tennis shoes and t-shirts and baseball hats, and they got very little water and they leave too late in the day. You know, they start up to the peak at 10 in the morning or something, and then they kind of get caught out later in the afternoon when the weather changes.
Got it. No, those are really great practical tips that hopefully we can, you know, avoid those emergencies up there and have a more enjoyable trip.
The other thing I'll just throw in is that on all the 14ers around here, you actually get cell phone coverage. So if you do have an emergency and you have a cell phone, you can call 911 and get, you know, the local search and rescue to come and deal with you. And again, one of the things I do is I teach technical rope rescue courses. So I teach a lot of the search and rescue groups around the state of Colorado how to do both high angle and low angle sorts of rescues and those kinds of things.
Great. You have so much experience in courses and fishing. I feel like we could go on for days. But I am really curious about I'm switching gears back and forth, but I'm really interested in your bluegrass trip and the classical river trips that you guys offer, the 8-day and 2-day trips, and what that entails. Music and rafting and outdoor recreation all combined in one. I mean, this is a hack that more people need to know about.
Yeah. Well, again, for 30 some years now, we've been offering an 8-day classical music trip on the Green River with a string quartet. A couple of times we've actually had a quintet and added a flute player, but that usually happens toward the end of July. And again, it's a wilderness oriented trip and it's way out in the middle of nowhere. And so we have to actually fly our clients into a little mesa right above the river. And then we kind of encourage them to hike down to the river, but we pick people who don't want to hike up in our van and then pick up their personal gear and stuff to get it down to the river. And then we do 8 days on the river, and there's pretty much music every day, because these guys are always practicing for the next concert. So they get into camp and they break out the stuff, and we pitch a tarp so they got shade and comfort, and they start practicing. You know, they'll play a little bit and then they'll talk about what they just did, and then they usually do about 4 formal concerts in the 8 days, and they're pretty long concerts, you know, a couple of hours.
Oh, wow.
And you know, it's just a cool experience. And for years we've been thinking about doing a bluegrass trip here on the Arkansas, and this year we've actually put it together for the 9th and 10th of July this year. And there's a guy that has done some music with us. We had a 40, 50, 70 party a few years ago where we were 40 years in the river business, 50 years of marriage, and we both turned 70. So we had this guy came and played music, the bluegrass stuff, and it's his band that's coming to do it. And
that sounds like a blast.
Yeah.
So are these the river guides are also the musicians, or are they separate groups?
No. The musicians are all separate. I mean, most musicians are all for the separate. Classical music trip, most of our musicians for years came from the LA Philharmonic.
Okay.
And then a lot of those guys got older, and so we started branching out, and we've gotten people from the Boston Symphony, we've got Santa Fe Symphony. You know, it just kind of varies where we get our musicians from. And so we've learned over the years that you just get one person that wants to put a quartet together, and you let them find the other players. And so we've got a guy now that's put, I think, the last 3 quartets together for us.
Okay. And the concerts that are happening, are they just for the private groups that are on the river trip, or they end up in towns in?
No. It's a wilderness. It's a wilderness setting. I mean, we're wilderness camping, and it's just people on our trip that get to listen to it. And periodically, you'll camp next to someone else, or somebody will see. I've got a huge, big old silver box that all the instruments fit in, and people will see that box and they say, "Where are you camping tonight?" And they try to camp close. You know, so we sort of say, yeah, but there's a fee. You have to bring us ice, because ice in the desert is gold.
I bet.
And so they have to bring us a block of ice to come and listen. And quite a few people, and some people just float by and sort of go really slow as they float by so they can hear the music.
Paddling backwards a little bit, taking it longer.
Yeah.
Oh, well, this is so amazing. I love your passion for conservation, Bill, and the work that you guys are doing. It could not be easy to run a company that it has offered so many adventures. Just a little behind the scenes about what does it take to run a rafting company? What are all the things you guys are managing on a day-to-day basis? Getting people out, safely, making sure they're having fun. How do you find guides? Like, what does a day look like or a week look like in Bill's world?
Well, what I'd tell you is you have to learn how to thrive on chaos, because things change. Like, people come late, different things happen. You know, I always tell guides that you're not on the river trip you think you're going to be on until you push away and float down the river, because I might have to grab you and take you somewhere else. And so it can be pretty complex. And I guess I've always kind of had that personality that I thrive on that chaos. I like solving problems. I like making things come together and work. But my daughter actually worked as head guide one season. She'd worked as a guide for a number of seasons, and she came up to me at the end of the year, and she said, "You know, I lost 20 pounds doing this. I don't know how you've done this for all these years, but I can't do it again." And she grew up with it. So, you know, it's just one of those things. I guess it takes a certain sort of mental intellect to sort of thrive on that sort of stuff, and I like the challenge of it, I guess. You know, not just the challenge of running the rivers and the whitewater and all that other stuff, but the challenge of coordinating the logistics and putting it all together and making it all happen. So I guess I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it totally does. I mean, you have to enjoy that chaos, or be able to, you thrive on it, and you don't let that shake you. And it sounds like it actually fuels you in many ways. So. Bill, is there any tips for outdoor recreation for recreating responsibly, visiting Salida responsibly? Are there leave no trace principles that you'd like to share? Concerns that you're seeing with the increase in outdoor recreation, either from Salida's point of view or just rafting or outdoor recreation in general? We have to get that.
You know, I guess the big thing is I think you need to have a respect for the environment you're going into, and can't just think, well, I saw a TV show or I read a coffee table book and I'm young and fit and I'm bomb proof and I can go and do these things. And we see people all the time that, you know, bite off more than they can handle, or get caught out because, you know, things change, the weather changes, or something breaks, or something happens. So, you know, I don't want to discourage people from coming outdoors, but I would encourage people to have a little bit of respect for the environment they're getting into, and understand that if you don't have that respect, it can come back and bite you. And I see a lot of people that want to come and rent boats and things like that, that have no kind of concept about what they're getting into. They just think, oh, I'm going to lollygag and float down the river. And they don't realize that this is a whitewater river, and you've got to have some sort of skill, and you've got to have some sort of, not necessarily expertise, but common sense about the environment that you're getting into, and understanding what the consequences are if you don't do things in the right order, in the right way.
No, it's really helpful, and it helps not just them have a better experience, but all the resources that go into rescue, search and rescue, and preventing some of these things could really have a great impact. Well, thank you so much, Bill. We look forward to coming back and visiting you. I'm going to try to get on the calendar for the bluegrass or the classical music trip. That sounds incredible. And if there's anything we can do to help promote Dvorak, which is how it's pronounced, please let us know. You can find Dvorak on tripoutside.com or on their website and their Instagram, DVK. I'm going to get this right.
You know, the other thing that we talked about, that DVK is actually DVK SUP. And so we actually do rent and teach people how to stand up paddleboard. And so that's becoming very popular. And I forgot to even mention that, because my son does most of that. He's very good. He can do class 4 whitewater in a SUP.
On a SUP. Okay. Well, yeah. I'm going to have to get your son on the podcast to talk about river running on a paddleboard. That just seems mind blowing. But DvorakExpeditions.com, DVK SUP, and you can find them on Instagram and, of course, on Trip Outside. Thank you so much for joining me today, Bill. I really enjoyed the conversation, and I truly mean it. Thank you for all the work that you've been doing for conservation and protecting our wild places and keeping them wild.
No worries, Reed. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.